Imagine you live in a place with a $4.1 trillion economy, so large it now ranks as the fourth biggest in the world, and yet the same place also has some of the highest poverty pressure in America once housing costs are factored in. That's California. Now zoom in. You're in a state of about 39.4 million people. Prices are not just a little high. The federal BEA says California's overall price level was 110.7, about 10.7% above the US average, in 2024, and its housing rent price level was 154.3, the highest in the country. And while California is a global symbol of wealth, creativity, and ambition, it also reported about 187,084 people experiencing homelessness in HUD's 2024 point-in-time estimate. So what does that do to a population psychologically? In this video, we're breaking down the psychology of California, the mindset of survival, status, hustle, reinvention, political contradiction, institutional distrust, and why a state that sells dreams can also feel like a stress test. Because California is not just a place, it's an emotional operating system. 1. The California Premium, why everything feels like opportunity, and a stress test. Imagine you land in California with a decent job offer, a laptop, and a little optimism. You're thinking, sunshine, innovation, maybe a fresh start. You can practically hear the startup soundtrack already. Then the rent tab opens, and suddenly you're not planning your future anymore. You're doing financial parkour. This is the first layer of California's psychology. The state trains people to think in extremes: extreme upside, extreme costs, extreme identity, extreme adaptation. It's the place where a person can be surrounded by trillion-dollar ideas and still be one car repair away from panic. That tension isn't just a vibe, it's measurable. California is still the biggest state by population. With about 39.5 million people, PPIC citing July 2025 estimates, and it remains one of the most economically powerful places on Earth. PPIC also notes the state's population growth has slowed sharply in the 21st century, including pandemic-era losses, and only modest rebound after that. At the same time, California officials have highlighted that California's economy is now the fourth largest in the world by nominal GDP, based on data they cite from IMF and BEA sources. In plain English, this is not some struggling backwater. This is a giant economic machine. And yet, here's where the psychology gets interesting. The US Census Quick Facts page shows California's median household income at $99,122, 2020 to 2024 ACS, which sounds strong until you look at housing. Median gross rent is $2,036, median owner cost with a mortgage are $2,946, and median owner-occupied home value is $734,700, census.gov. So yes, you can make good money in California. You can also spend it so fast your bank account starts blinking like a check engine light. That's not just because California is expensive in the generic internet comment sense. The BEA's regional price parity data shows California had the highest overall state price level in 2024, RPP 110.7, and the highest housing rent price parity in the country, 154.3, meaning housing costs are dramatically above the national average. BEA literally notes housing rents are often the main driver of these regional price differences. That one line, housing is the driver, explains a lot of behaviour, because when housing dominates your budget, it changes your psychology. You tolerate longer commutes, you delay marriage or kids, you take jobs you don't love, you stay in jobs you hate, you split apartments in your 30s and call it networking. You become very, very opinionated about zoning at parties. California turns ordinary life choices into strategic decisions, and the state knows housing is the pressure point. California's own Office of Data and Innovation, working with HCD, says the state has an ambitious goal to permit 2.5 million homes by 2030, with 1 million affordable for lower income levels, while also explaining how messy and fragmented local housing data/reporting can be across hundreds of jurisdictions. That's a very California sentence. We have a moonshot target, but first we need to clean the spreadsheet. Now, to be fair, and this is where we steelman the pro-California argument, people don't move to California because they're confused. They move there because the upside is real. California has deep labour markets, global industries, research universities, immigrant networks, entertainment, agriculture, logistics, and some of the world's highest value companies. The California premium is partly a tax on proximity. Proximity to capital, talent, culture, and opportunity. That's the strongest argument, and it's a serious one. But the counterpoint is this. When the premium gets too high, people stop experiencing opportunity as freedom and start experiencing it as pressure. PPIC's 2025 statewide survey on economic well-being captures this mood almost perfectly. It found 3 in 10 Californians say they, or someone in their household, cut back on food to save money. About 1 in 4 worry every day, or almost every day, about housing costs and debt. 1 in 5 say a $1,000 emergency expense would be very difficult or nearly impossible. And 71% believe children growing up in California today will be financially worse off than their parents. That last one is huge. Because once people lose faith in upward mobility, the culture changes. The old California story was, it's expensive, but worth it. The newer psychological script for a lot of residents is, it's expensive, and I'm not sure the sacrifice still compounds. PPIC also found only 29% say, the American dream still holds true, while most say it either used to be true or never was, and a majority say it's harder to achieve in California than elsewhere. That doesn't mean California is finished. That's lazy commentary. It means California is increasingly a state of dual realities, a place where extraordinary wealth is generated, and a place where everyday financial fragility remains common. PPIC's income inequality fact sheet puts numbers on that split. In 2023, families at the 90th percentile earned 11 times more than families at the 10th percentile, $336,000 versus $30,000, and only 2 states had wider gaps. That gap shapes the social atmosphere in subtle ways. When inequality gets that visible, people don't just compare themselves to neighbours, they compare themselves to lifestyles. In California, your benchmark is rarely, am I okay? It's often, why am I not there yet? And there is always visible, on your street, on your feed, at your coffee shop, or driving past you in matte black. This is why California can feel both inspiring and psychologically exhausting. It is a place that constantly advertises possibility while quietly invoicing you for access. And when enough people feel that mismatch, you start seeing behavioral adaptations, more outmigration sensitivity to cost, more multi-job households, more delayed life milestones, more political anger, more ideological polarization around housing, taxation, and local control. Even PPIC's migration analysis notes that outmigration patterns increasingly favor cheaper states and states without income taxes, and that movers are becoming more sensitive to destination housing costs. Not just leave California, but leave California carefully. So the first rule of understanding California's psychology is simple. California is not just a place. It's a pricing system that shapes identity. If you can afford the premium, it feels like the center of the future. If you can't, it can feel like a beautiful stress machine. And that tension between aspiration and affordability is the engine behind almost everything else we're going to talk about. If you're enjoying this breakdown so far, hit like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments what state or country you want me to analyze next. Because once we get into trust, migration, and the hustle brain California creates, it gets even more interesting. 2. The cost of living pressure cooker. Why California feels rich and broke at the same time. Imagine you're doing okay on paper in California. You've got a decent job, you're not reckless, you're not ordering caviar on DoorDash at 2 a.m, you're paying your bills, mostly on time, and you still somehow feel like one broken transmission, one medical bill, or one rent increase away from becoming a motivational quote. That feeling is not just in your head. This is one of the deepest psychological forces in California. The state constantly signals prosperity while many residents experience financial fragility. Palm trees, IPOs, Teslas, biotech, AI money, Hollywood, venture capital, ocean views, and then your insurance premium goes up, your rent jumps, and your grocery total starts looking like a small hostage negotiation. That contradiction shapes behavior. It makes people hustle harder. It makes them anxious. It makes them compare upward. It makes them distrust institutions. And it makes a lot of them quietly ask one question at night: should I just leave? Let's start with the numbers, because California doesn't do subtle when it comes to cost pressure. The US Census Quick Facts page shows California's median owner-occupied home value at $734,700, 2020 to 2024. Median monthly owner costs with a mortgage at $2,946, and median gross rent at $2,036. That is not a luxury lifestyle number. That is the middle of the distribution. The middle, not Beverly Hills, not Silicon Valley founder money. The middle. And the Bureau of Economic Analysis adds another layer. In 2024, California had the highest overall regional price parity, RPP, among states at 110.7, and more specifically, the highest housing rent price parity at 154.3. Translation: housing costs are doing the heavy lifting in making California feel expensive compared with the national average. So when people say California is expensive, that's not just a vibe, that's a measurable economic condition. Now here's where the psychology gets interesting. When a place is expensive, people don't just spend more, they start thinking differently. They become hyper-attentive to signals, job title, zip code, commute length, school district, whether your landlord renovates your building, which is often a polite way of saying your rent is about to enter another tax bracket. They become strategic in weirdly intimate ways. Who they date, whether they have kids, whether they can afford to help family, whether they can move closer to work, whether they should keep pretending that 90 minutes in traffic is fine. California trains people to optimize everything, because the penalties for inefficiency are brutal. You see this in migration behavior too. PPIC reports that 34% of Californians have seriously considered leaving because of high housing costs, and 21% have considered leaving because of a lack of well-paying jobs. It also notes California has experienced net losses of almost 900,000 people, citing housing as the primary reason since 2015. That's not a little grumbling. That's mass strategic reconsideration. And where do people go? PPIC's recent migration analysis shows net outflows favoring nearby states and no income tax states, with notable net losses to places like Texas, Florida, Washington, Arizona, and Oregon, and disproportionately high per capita losses to Nevada and Idaho. The pattern is not random, it's basically people doing spreadsheet math with their lives. This is where the psychology of California becomes a survival script. Stay and compete harder, leave and reset, or stay while emotionally planning your exit for 3 years. A lot of people are doing option 3. And to be fair, there's a strong steelman argument for California's cost structure. The best argument goes like this: California is expensive because it is valuable. It has major industry clusters, world-class universities, ports, agriculture, climate advantages in many regions, and massive economic opportunity. People pay a premium to be near opportunity, talent, and networks. In that reading, high prices are a byproduct of demand and success. That argument is partly true, but here's the problem. When the cost of staying rises faster than people's sense of control, the psychology turns from ambition into resentment. And resentment is a political and social accelerant. You can see hints of that in public opinion data. PPIC found Californians overwhelmingly concerned about economic strain. In its December 2025 survey, 36% named cost of living/economy/inflation/jobs as the top issue, 13% named housing cost/availability, and 71% said California will have bad financial times in the next 12 months. In the same survey, 45% said housing costs are a financial strain on them. That matters psychologically, because once people shift into defensive mode, everything gets reinterpreted through scarcity. A new housing development? Will it help, or just raise values and taxes around me? A policy announcement? Cool speech. But will my bill go down? A booming stock market? Great. Does that help me pay rent? This is how a high-performing economy can coexist with low emotional trust. Now add the street-level visibility of social strain. PPIC's homelessness analysis notes that California's unhoused population grew by more than 20%, about 36,000 people, from 2019 to 2024, though growth slowed to about 3%, from 2023 to 2024, with virtually no increase in the unsheltered population in that latest year. It also found 53% of Californians say they see someone experiencing homelessness every day. HUD's 2024 AHAR data puts California's total homeless population at 187,084, with a homelessness rate of 48 per 10,000 residents, and shows California with a large unsheltered share in the state-level table. Here's the psychological effect of that. Even if your own life is stable, constant exposure to visible instability changes your internal baseline. You start feeling that the system is more fragile than officials say. You become more cautious, more cynical, more likely to hoard cash, more likely to judge public spending harshly. And then the insurance issue arrives like a final boss. Wildfire risk and insurance market stress have made California's cost anxiety even more existential. Reuters reported State Farm sought emergency rate increases in 2025 after severe wildfire losses, citing over $1 billion paid in claims and saying it had paid $1.26 in claims/expenses for every $1 in premium over 9 years in California. Whether you agree with insurers or not, the psychological point is this. Californians increasingly feel like they are paying not just for where they live, but for compound risk, housing risk, climate risk, insurance risk, policy risk, and job market volatility, all stacked. That creates a unique California mindset, ambitious but exhausted. You still get the dream language, innovation, reinvention, next big thing. But under it, a lot of people are running an internal operating system called, "Can I keep this life?" And that question shapes everything: voting, family decisions, career choices, even identity. Because in California, status is often public, but financial stress is private. So people smile at brunch, post beach photos, and quietly run numbers in their heads. That's not hypocrisy, that's adaptation. Quick pause. If you're enjoying this breakdown, hit like and subscribe, because the next sections get even more interesting. We're going to talk about trust, power, and why Californians can support institutions and distrust them at the same time. And if you want a future episode on another state or country, drop it in the comments. California doesn't just produce industries, it produces a psychology, high aspiration, high stimulation, high comparison, and high burnout tolerance. And once you see that pattern, a lot of California behavior suddenly makes perfect sense. 3. The trust paradox. Californians distrust the system, then use it anyway. Imagine you're standing in line at a California DMV. The person in front of you is mad. The person behind you is mad. You're also mad. And yet, everyone still showed up. That's California in one scene. People complain about the government, distrust the process, roast politicians online, and then still rely on the state for schools, roads, public universities, wildfire response, water systems, labor protections, permits, courts, insurance oversight, and 100 other things they don't think about until something breaks. This is one of the deepest psychological patterns in California: high dependence plus low trust. And honestly, that combination creates a very specific emotional climate: chronic skepticism, constant political irritation, low patience, high expectations, and a weird kind of civic participation where people say, "This is broken," while actively trying to use it to fix everything. That is not hypocrisy. That is survival. California is too big, too expensive, too complex, and too interconnected for people to simply opt out of institutions. So instead, they develop a coping style: functional distrust. They don't trust easily, but they still transact, they still vote, they still sue, they still petition, they still organize, they still file complaints, they still show up at city council meetings with 14 tabs open and receipts from 2009. Very California behavior. Now let's put numbers on this, because the numbers are the real story. In PPIC's late 2025 statewide survey, Californians were split on whether the state is headed in the right direction: 48% right direction, 51% wrong direction, and 71% said California would have bad economic times in the next 12 months. In the same survey, 65% said housing affordability is a big problem in their area. That matters psychologically. When people feel squeezed, they become more suspicious of institutions, not because they suddenly became ideological, but because their daily life starts feeling like a stress test. Rent is high, insurance is weird, commutes are long, childcare is brutal, buying a home feels like a fantasy side quest. And when life feels like that, your brain starts asking, who is this system actually working for? PPIC's November 2025 analysis captured that sentiment directly. Majorities said they trust Sacramento only some of the time or none of the time, and 65% said state government is run by a few big interests rather than for the benefit of all people. The same PPIC piece also noted that nearly everyone said government wastes at least some tax money, with 47% saying it wastes a lot and 44% saying it wastes some. That is an extraordinary psychological profile. Not people are disengaged, not people don't care. It's worse and more interesting. They care a lot, they just don't trust the machinery. And here's the paradox. Even with all that distrust, Californians still approve of individual state leaders at much higher rates than they approve of the system as a whole. In PPIC's December 2025 survey, 54% approved of Governor Newsom, 51% approved of the state legislature, and 51% approved of their own state legislators, even while broader sentiment about direction and economic outlook remained pessimistic. That split tells you something important about California's psychology. People often separate the abstract system, Sacramento is a mess, from specific actors or outcomes. I still like this policy, or I like what this person did on X issue. In other words, Californians may distrust the engine but still support the driver, at least on certain roads. You see this in policy debates all the time. People will say, government is inefficient, taxes are too high, nothing gets fixed. And in the next sentence, why aren't we building more housing? Why is wildfire insurance collapsing? Why isn't mental health treatment easier to access? Why can't transit be safer and cleaner? Why does childcare cost a kidney? That's not contradiction. That's institutional ambivalence. They want less waste and more results, less bureaucracy and more capacity, less ideology and more competence. Basically, they want government to work like Apple when it launches a product and not like Comcast when you call customer service. Good luck, but fair point. Now to steelman the other side. A lot of people will argue California is actually too dependent on government intervention, that regulations, permitting delays, fragmented local control, and political gridlock are the core reasons things feel so slow and expensive. There's real evidence behind that argument, especially in housing and infrastructure. It's not crazy. In fact, it explains a lot of the frustration. But the counterpoint is just as strong. California's scale and complexity mean markets alone can't solve everything either. Housing shortages, wildfire resilience, water management, public health, and urban transit all require coordination at a level private actors usually won't do on their own. So Californians end up psychologically trapped between two instincts. The system is too involved. The system needs to do more. That tension creates a population that is politically loud, emotionally exhausted, and hyper-reactive to symbols of fairness. This is why a pothole becomes a political philosophy debate. This is why a zoning meeting feels like a custody battle. This is why one bad video of retail theft can become a statewide argument about civilization. Because beneath the issue is the same question. Can this place still govern itself well? And California keeps answering, maybe. Depends where you live. Depends how much money you make. Depends what year your insurance renewal hits. Depends if your kid needs public services. Depends if your landlord is raising rent again. That uncertainty is the psychology. One more number that matters here. In PPIC's 2025 Economic Wellbeing Survey, 8 in 10 Californians said most elected officials don't care what people like them think. That's not just dissatisfaction. That's a representation crisis. When people feel unheard, they don't become passive. They become cynical, and cynicism is socially contagious. And once cynicism spreads, everything gets interpreted through suspicion. Policy equals corruption. Delay equals incompetence. Compromise equals sellout. Expertise equals elitism. Enforcement equals oppression. Non-enforcement equals collapse. That's a hard environment to govern in. But California also has a hidden strength here. Its distrust often converts into participation. People don't just complain, they organize, they litigate, they protest, they start neighborhood groups, they file public records requests, they pressure school boards, they build advocacy coalitions, they create ballot initiatives, they move cities and vote differently there. Messy? Yes. Annoying? Constantly. Democratic? Also yes. So the psychological takeaway is this: California is not a state of blind faith. It is a state of transactional belief. People believe when they see proof. They support what works. They punish what feels performative. And they are emotionally shaped by a system they both resent and rely on. That's not stability in the calm sense. It's stability in the held together by tension, talent, and caffeine sense. And weirdly, that may be one reason California keeps functioning at all. If this part is hitting home, pause for a second and let me know in the comments, do you think California's biggest issue is bad leadership, bad incentives, or just the sheer scale of the state? And if you're enjoying this breakdown, subscribe, because the next section gets even more personal. We're talking about identity, status, and the California performance trap, where everyone is trying to look okay while privately doing math in their head. 4. The California performance trap: identity, status, and the pressure to look like you're winning. Imagine you're in California and someone asks, "How are you?" Now, in many places, that means, "How are you?" In California, depending on the neighborhood, it can secretly mean, "How's work? How's your side project? Are you dating someone impressive? Did you move to a better area? Are you still renting? Are you building something? Are you okay? Or just good at packaging stress?" This is the California performance trap. It's not just about being successful, it's about being seen as someone who is on the way to something. California is full of people in transition. Actors between gigs, founders before launch, creators before breakout, lawyers before partner, engineers before liquidity, families before we can finally buy. The state attracts ambition, but ambition in public often becomes performance. And to be clear, some of the performance is healthy. It's confidence, it's optimism, it's self-belief. But when the cost of staying is high and inequality is visible, performance can turn into survival camouflage. You don't say, "I'm drowning." You say, "Big season, lots going on." California is elite at that sentence. Let's ground this in facts. PPIC's wealth report makes a key point. California households tend to have higher median wealth than households in other states, $288,000 versus $180,000. But the benefits are uneven, and a lot of that wealth reflects high home values rather than broad financial security. PPIC also notes the spread is extreme. Households around the 80th percentile of wealth, about $1.3 million, have 100 times plus the net worth of households around the 20th percentile, about $12,000. That kind of gap changes how people behave socially, because in a place where the average includes both a family with modest savings and a tech employee sitting on stock, equity, people stop comparing themselves to the median and start comparing themselves to the visible winners. And California makes winners very visible. It's not just rich people. It's the aesthetics of success, the neighborhood, the gym routine, the startup language, the travel photos, the school district, the "we just moved to" post, the quiet flex of "I know a guy at." This is why California often feels like a live audition. Even basic life metrics carry status signals because housing is so central. The census shows California's median owner-occupied home value at $734,700, median mortgage owner costs at $2,946 per month, and median gross rent at $2,036. Those aren't just numbers, they become identity markers. Renting versus owning, where you rent, how far you commute, whether you have roommates, whether you can stay in your city. All of that gets folded into how people feel about themselves. And because California's price system is so intense, many people end up performing stability while privately managing volatility. That's the trap. PPIC's Economic Wellbeing Survey found 68% of adults expected bad financial times in California over the next year, and more than 8 in 10 viewed the availability of well-paying jobs in their part of the state as at least somewhat of a problem. So even in a state famous for opportunity, a lot of residents are psychologically bracing for impact. Now, layer in commute and geography. California status is weird because people often buy status with time before they can buy it with money. You live farther out to save on housing. You commute longer to access the higher-paying labor market. You lose hours each week just staying in the game. The Fred/Census commute data shows long average one-way commute times in major California counties. For example, Los Angeles County, approximately 30.4 minutes, Contra Costa, approximately 35.3, Riverside, approximately 33.8, San Bernardino, approximately 32.6, and San Joaquin, approximately 34.1, ACS-based. Series shown by Fred 2024 values. That may not sound dramatic until you multiply it by days, months, years, and stress. California can make you feel close to opportunity and far from your life at the same time. And then there's the digital layer. California is not just a physical place, it's also a media ecosystem. It exports cultural standards, it manufactures aspiration, it runs on image. So the pressure is not only local, it's algorithmic. A California Youth Mental Health Survey, California Endowment, found young people reported social media and politics/current events as net negative influences on mental health in the results shown, with social media registering more negative than positive responses in that item set. The same survey also showed high reported rates of feeling overwhelmed, anxiety, excessive worry, and loneliness among respondents. That matters because California's identity pressure increasingly happens on two stages: the real world, rent, jobs, neighborhoods, schools; the feed, comparison, beauty/status signaling, productivity culture, lifestyle branding. And when both are intense, people can start living in a permanent state of presentation mode. Even the legal and policy world is reflecting this tension around platforms and mental health. In February 2026, Reuters reported on a Los Angeles trial involving claims that social media platforms harmed a California woman's mental health as a child. The case highlighted internal platform discussions and broader litigation over youth mental health and design incentives. Reuters quoted an internal Instagram presentation line shown at trial: "If we want to win big with teens, we must bring them in as tweens." That quote is not the whole story, but it captures the incentive structure people are reacting to. And here's the steelman argument for California's performance culture. Some people will say, that's not fake, that's ambition, and they're right. Partly. California rewards initiative, storytelling, networking, and self-reinvention. Those skills matter. Being able to pitch yourself, rebrand, and keep moving after failure is genuinely adaptive in a volatile economy. In that sense, performance is often just competence under pressure. But the counterpoint is this: when identity becomes too tied to visible success, people can become emotionally brittle. They feel behind even when they're objectively doing well. They hide struggle longer. They delay asking for help. They mistake burnout for discipline. That's the darker edge of California psychology. It's a place where people are often highly capable, highly stimulated, highly comparative, and privately exhausted. And because California is so diverse, census also shows 44.4% speak a language other than English at home, and 93.5% of households have broadband. The performance trap shows up differently across communities, generations, and industries, but the common thread is the same: the pressure to remain legible as doing okay in a place that constantly raises the visual standard of okay. So the lesson here is not California is fake. That's lazy. The better read is, California is a high-visibility environment. In high-visibility environments, identity becomes strategic. And when identity becomes strategic, emotional life often gets edited. If this section feels a little too accurate, that's because a lot of people living in California are not just managing money, they're managing optics. And next, we're going to talk about the thing that powers all of it, the hustle brain. Why California can make people more creative, more productive, and more anxious all at once. If you're still with me, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Do you think California's image culture motivates people, or quietly burns them out? 5. The hustle operating system, California's side quest economy, ambition addiction, and burnout math. Imagine you're in California on a Tuesday. It's 6:15 a.m. You open your phone, and before your eyes fully focus, you've already seen a startup founder posting build-in-public screenshots, a realtor bragging about a starter home that costs more than a small kingdom, a wellness coach selling Calm in 12 payments, and a guy your age saying he accidentally made $40,000 this month flipping niche software templates. By 6:17 a.m., you haven't brushed your teeth yet, but you already feel behind. That feeling? That's not random. That's cultural infrastructure. California doesn't just run on money, it runs on visible motion. Even when the economy slows, the vibe says, keep moving, keep optimizing, keep reinventing, and if you're tired, monetize the tiredness. And to be fair, there's a reason this psychology exists. California has built one of the most productive idea machines in human history. But the same system that generates innovation also generates a very specific kind of stress. The fear that standing still equals disappearing. And the data backs the contradiction. In December 2025, California's unemployment rate was 5.5%, and the state lost 1,700 non-farm payroll jobs that month. The state's EDD also noted that the year-over-year non-farm job change was negative, marking the first year-over decline since March 2021. In other words, even in a place famous for opportunity, people can feel the slowdown in real time. Now watch what happens at the same time on the entrepreneurship side. According to the Fred series sourced from the US Census Bureau's Business Formation Statistics, California recorded 57,414 business applications in January 2026, seasonally adjusted, up from 48,812 in December 2025. Translation: even when payroll jobs wobble, Californians don't just wait around. They file an EIN and start something, or at least plan to. That's the hustle operating system. It's not just work hard, it's more like, if the main road is blocked, build a side road. If that side road gets crowded, sell maps. And before we dunk on it too hard, let's steelman the pro-hustle argument because it's strong. The best argument for California's hustle culture is this: it has historically been a rational adaptation to volatility. Industries rise and fall fast here. Entertainment changes, tech changes, real estate changes, immigration patterns change, regulation shifts, capital flows in and out. In that kind of environment, the person who survives is often the one who can pivot faster than the system can disappoint them. That's not pathology, that's survival intelligence. The problem is when survival mode becomes identity. Because now you're not just a person with a job, you're a personal brand with a sleep deficit, and California's cost structure pours gasoline on that. Psychology. The California Legislative Analyst's Office noted in early 2026 that only about 45% of California households would likely qualify for a bottom-tier home mortgage based on income in 2025, down from about 60% in 2019. That is a brutal shift in a short period of time. It means even people who are doing okay can feel like they're running on a treadmill that got steeper while they were jogging. The US Census Quick Facts page for California adds more texture. Median gross rent, 2020 to 2024, is listed at $2,036, and median owner-occupied home value is $734,700. Those are not just numbers, those are psychological conditions. They shape how people date, where they live, when they have kids, whether they take risks, and how long they can afford to fail. And if you're lower or middle income, the pressure gets even sharper. California's public health indicator site, Let's Get Healthy California, reports that in 2022, 83% of rented California households making less than $75,000 a year were housing cost-burdened. Cost-burdened means spending 30% or more of income on housing. Once that's your baseline, every flat tire feels like a policy issue. This is where the hustle psychology gets misunderstood. People outside California often frame it as vanity, everyone trying to be famous, rich, or the next big thing. And yes, that exists. California can absolutely feel like one long audition tape with better weather. But a lot of hustle is simpler than that. It's rent, it's childcare, it's health insurance. It's my paycheck is fine, but my life is still mathematically hostile. And when formal labour markets tighten, people don't stop needing money. They move into informal, flexible, or platform-based work. That's where the dream gets murkier. A 2024 UC Berkeley Labour Center report examined 52,370 trips from 1,088 drivers across 5 major metro areas and found that, using net earnings over a driver's full shift, after expenses, a majority of drivers in each metro area earned less than the applicable minimum wage. For California passenger drivers specifically, the report found median hourly employee equivalent wages of $5.97 without tips and $7.63 with tips. That's not a side hustle. That's a spreadsheet crying in the dark. Now, to be fair, Gig work supporters would argue flexibility has value, and they're right. Some people genuinely prefer variable hours, app-based work, and not being tied to a boss. For caregivers, students, and people managing unstable schedules, flexibility can be the difference between earning something and earning nothing. But the hard question, the California question, is this: flexible for whom? Profitable for whom? Sustainable for whom? Because if a system sells freedom but requires constant overwork to break even, it's not freedom. It's outsourced risk with a nice user interface. And this is where the conversation leaves economics and enters psychology. When a whole region trains people to make it while making basic stability harder to secure, you get a population that is both ambitious and exhausted. High-functioning and brittle, productive and quietly panicked. The California Healthcare Foundation's 2024 statewide survey captures that tension in public health terms. More than half of Californians who tried to make an appointment reported trouble finding a mental health provider who takes their insurance, and 81% said increasing access to mental health care should be an important priority for state policymakers. The same survey also found 53% of Californians skipped or postponed care due to cost in the previous year, and 38% reported having medical debt. Think about what that means psychologically. You're under pressure to perform, housing is expensive, work is unstable, your side hustle may not pay enough, and if the stress starts cracking you, getting help is itself a maze. That's not just a policy problem, that's a culture problem. California's hustle operating system creates incredible outcomes at the top. Companies, wealth, art, technology, scientific breakthroughs, entire industries. It also creates a giant middle layer of people who feel like they are one missed invoice away from becoming a motivational quote. And yet, here's the weird part. This same pressure cooker also produces some of the most adaptive, creative, resilient people anywhere. Californians learn to network, improvise, cross-skill, and recover. They become multilingual in industries. A person can go from assistant to creator to consultant to founder to freelancer to employee, again in one decade, and call it a normal stretch. In another state, that might look unstable. In California, that's just Wednesday. So the psychology of California hustle is not simply greed, vanity, or ambition. It's a feedback loop. High opportunity plus high cost plus visible success plus unstable security equals perpetual motion. And perpetual motion can build empires. It can also burn out the people carrying them. That's the paradox. California teaches you how to build the future. It just doesn't always teach you how to survive your own. Upgrade. And in the next section, we're going to talk about the part nobody likes discussing out loud. How California's image economy, status, aesthetics, wellness, beauty, and online identity turns psychology into a marketplace, and why looking okay can become a full-time job. 6. The image economy. When identity becomes a marketplace. Imagine you're in California and you're not just living your life, you're also curating it. Not because you're fake, because the environment rewards visibility. In California, image is not just vanity, it's often economic infrastructure. Your look, your vibe, your confidence, your story, your network, your online presence, your personal brand, all of it can affect opportunities. Jobs, clients, partnerships, dates, social access, even housing in some circles. Oh, you're in that area now? That's the next layer of California psychology. Identity becomes a market asset. And once identity becomes a market asset, people start managing themselves like portfolios. You don't just ask, how am I doing? You ask, how am I coming across? Am I falling behind? Do I still look like I'm in motion? Can I monetize this skill/aesthetic/lifestyle? That pressure is not equally distributed, and it doesn't hit everyone the same way. But California amplifies it because the state sits at the intersection of entertainment, tech platforms, beauty culture, and status-heavy industries. It's one of the few places where your offline and online self can both affect your paycheck. And when those two worlds merge, psychology gets expensive. Let's ground this. The US Census shows California households are deeply connected digitally. 93.5% of households have a broadband subscription, and 44.4% speak a language other than English at home. That combination matters. It means image culture in California isn't one single trend. It spreads across communities, languages, and platforms, and it reaches almost everyone through connected devices. Now add the mental health side. The California Healthcare Foundation's statewide survey found 81% of Californians say increasing access to mental health care should be an important priority for state policymakers. It also found more than half of people who tried to make a mental health appointment had trouble finding a provider who takes their insurance. That is a major signal. Stress is common, and support is often hard to access. And among young people, the signal gets even sharper. The California Endowment Youth Mental Health Survey found that respondents rated social media as a net negative influence on mental health in the survey item breakdown, while politics/current events scored even more negatively. The same report also shows high levels of anxiety, overwhelm, loneliness, and excessive worry among respondents. In other words, the feed is not neutral. It's psychologically active. That's a huge deal in California, because this is a state where the feed is often tied to aspiration. People are not just scrolling friends, they're scrolling competitors, role models, clients, investors, creators, actors, founders, and people who somehow soft-launched a whole new life in Malibu without warning. So the California image economy does something subtle. It collapses the gap between self-expression and self-surveillance. You post to connect, then you compare, then you optimize, then you wonder why you're tired. And the platforms absolutely understand the incentive structure. In the ongoing Los Angeles youth addiction trial reported by Reuters in February 2026, internal metamaterials shown in court included the line, "If we want to win big with teens, we must bring them in as tweens." Meta disputes the broader allegations and argues other factors contributed to the plaintiff's mental health struggles. But the trial itself highlights the core issue. Platforms are designed around engagement, and engagement often feeds comparison, compulsion, and identity pressure. Reuters also reported another filing in February 2026 citing a Meta survey in which about 19% of Instagram users ages 13 to 15 reported seeing unwanted nude or sexual content, and 8% reported seeing self-harm or threats of self-harm. Even if those are self-reports, as Reuters notes, the psychological point is obvious. Many young users are navigating adult-level emotional inputs before they have adult-level emotional tools. Now zoom back out to California culture. This is a state that already runs on high comparison, housing comparison, income comparison, school comparison, body/image comparison, lifestyle comparison, career trajectory comparison. Social platforms don't create that from scratch, they intensify it. That's why California's image economy is so powerful and so exhausting. It sits on top of an already competitive environment and turns everyday life into a continuous stream of metrics: views, followers, engagement, aesthetics, fit, productivity, momentum. You can be doing objectively well and still feel behind because someone else's highlight reel hit your phone before breakfast. And to steelman the other side, there is a real upside here. Image culture, branding, and online visibility have opened doors for millions of people who would have been locked out in older gatekeeper systems. Creators, small business owners, freelancers, artists, stylists, coaches, educators, and niche experts can now reach audiences directly. California, in many ways, helped build that world. That part is real. The problem is the hidden tax, constant self-presentation. Because once your identity has economic value, rest starts to feel risky. If you go quiet, you lose traction. If you stop posting, you disappear. If you look normal, you feel underpackaged. If you admit struggle, you worry you'll look unstable. So people learn to perform wellness while being stressed, perform confidence while uncertain, perform abundance while budgeting, perform authenticity in increasingly polished ways. That's not a moral failure. That's adaptation to incentives. And California is basically the global lab for those incentives. So the psychology here is not Californians are shallow. That's too simplistic. The better read is, California is a high visibility, high opportunity environment where image can become income. And when that happens, people start treating identity like work. Some thrive in that system, some burn out in it. Most do a little of both. And once image becomes labor, the question changes from who am I to how long can I keep this up? That's the hidden emotional cost of the California image economy. If this section hit nerve, let me know in the comments. Do you think social media mostly creates opportunity now, or mostly creates pressure? And if you're enjoying this series, subscribe. because next we're getting into one of the biggest drivers of California's mindset: risk. Wildfire risk, insurance risk, climate risk, and what it does to people when uncertainty becomes part of the cost of living. 7. The risk tax. Wildfire, insurance, and the psychology of living in a state that can burn. Imagine it's January in California, not August, not peak summer, January. You wake up and the air smells wrong, the sky looks strange, your phone starts lighting up with evacuation alerts, power outages, road closures, and photos that look like movie scenes except nobody in the photo is acting. Suddenly the conversation is no longer, what neighbourhood do you want to move to? It's, what's your evacuation route? And do you have coverage? And wait, are we even still insured? This is one of the most under-discussed pieces of California psychology. People are not just paying a housing premium, they're paying a risk premium. And risk changes people. It changes how they spend, where they buy, what they trust, how they vote, and how they think about the future. If housing pressure creates the California stress baseline, wildfire and insurance instability, add a second layer, ambient uncertainty. You can have the job, you can have the house, you can have the nice area, and then one fire season reminds you that all of it sits inside a probability curve. That's a very different kind of anxiety than normal cost of living stress. Let's start with the hard numbers. Cal Fire's 2025 Incident Archive reports 8,036 wildfires, 525,223 acres burned, 31 fatalities, preliminary, and 16,512 structures destroyed for the year. That's not abstract climate debate stuff. That's mass disruption with addresses attached. And Cal Fire's current statistics page, updated February 23, 2026, shows the state tracks fire risk year-round, not just in summer, with combined state/federal wildfire stats and ongoing incident response totals. In other words, this is not a seasonal inconvenience anymore in the public mind, it's part of the operating environment. Cal Fire's own 2025 archive narrative also warned that spring 2025 was warmer and drier than normal, fuel moisture was low, and fire potential was expected to increase steadily through summer, with above-normal large fire activity forecast by July and August. That kind of official language matters psychologically because it normalizes a state of readiness. People start living in pre-alert mode, and once risk becomes normalized, it starts affecting decisions far beyond emergency prep. This is where insurance enters the chat like an uninvited accountant. Reuters reported in February 2025 that State Farm, California's largest private insurer, sought emergency rate hikes after the Los Angeles wildfires. The filing sought increases of up to 22% for non-tenant homeowners, 15% for renters/condo owners, and 38% for rental dwellings. Reuters also reported the company said it had already received 8,700 plus claims and paid out more than $1 billion as of February 1st, and that over a 9-year period it paid $1.26 in claims/expenses for every $1 collected in premium. Whether you sympathize more with homeowners or insurers, the psychological impact is the same. People start feeling like they're renting certainty from institutions that may or may not still want the risk. That's a brutal feeling. Because insurance is supposed to be the sleep-at-night product. When insurance itself becomes unstable, the emotional damage is bigger than the bill. It tells people the system is repricing not just their house, but their sense of safety. And in California, when the admitted market pulls back, more people end up in the FAIR plan, the state's insurer of last resort system. A California Assembly Insurance Committee background paper, January 2026, says that as of December 2025, the FAIR plan had 668,609 policies in force, up 146% since September 2022, with total exposure reaching $724 billion. The same document also notes the FAIR plan handled about 5,400 claims from the Pacific Palisades and Eaton wildfires and paid nearly $3.5 billion to policyholders. That is not a niche backstop anymore. That is a major signal of market stress. And the California Department of Insurance itself has been publicly framing the FAIR plan as something that should be temporary, not permanent. In a 2025 press release, Commissioner Ricardo Lara said, "The FAIR plan needs to be a temporary option, not the only option. while the department described broader efforts to stabilize the market and improve fair plan operations and claims handling. That quote captures the whole California risk dilemma. The state is trying to keep coverage available. Insurers are trying to price escalating risk. Homeowners are trying to stay housed. And everyone is mad at everyone. Very California, very human. Now let's steelman the insurer side for a second, because this part usually gets flattened into companies bad. The strongest insurer argument is straightforward. If catastrophic losses are rising and concentrated, and if rate structures don't reflect that risk fast enough, insurers reduce exposure or stop writing in those markets. That's not ideology, that's actuarial survival. There's truth in that. But here's the homeowner side counterpoint, also strong. If risk-based pricing rises too fast, entire communities become effectively uninsurable or unaffordable, and people who did nothing wrong get priced out of stability. Also true. So California households end up carrying a psychological burden that goes beyond cost. They have to think like risk managers. That means tracking fire maps, hardening homes, understanding policy exclusions, worrying about non-renewals, comparing deductibles, wondering if smoke damage will be covered, keeping go bags while also paying HOA dues. It's hard to feel settled when your life includes both a mortgage and an evacuation plan. And this doesn't just hit homeowners. Renters feel it through higher rents, tighter supply after fires, displacement and neighborhood instability. Small businesses feel it through commercial coverage issues and property risk. Local governments feel it through infrastructure strain and recovery costs. Even people far from fire zones absorb the anxiety through headlines, rate hikes, and the sense that this can move faster than we can plan. That's the psychology of the risk tax. You don't need to lose your house to feel the stress of a system that keeps reminding you loss is possible. Now, to be clear, this doesn't make California uniquely doomed. Plenty of places face climate-linked risks: hurricanes, floods, heat, tornadoes. The difference in California is the combination: very high property values, visible wildland-urban interface exposure, insurance market, strain, and a population already carrying high housing costs. So wildfire risk in California is not just a natural hazard issue, it's a financial identity issue. People start asking, can I afford to stay here if the next renewal spikes? Do I buy here if coverage is uncertain? Do I leave before this gets worse? Am I overreacting or just early? That last question is pure California psychology, because California often turns future risk into present emotion. People don't wait for the crisis to fully arrive. They start living around the possibility of it. That can make Californians seem anxious, cynical, or overdramatic to outsiders. But a lot of it is just pattern recognition. When your state trains you to watch fire weather, housing markets, insurance filings, and local politics at the same time, you stop thinking like a resident and start thinking like a portfolio manager with asthma. And yet, here's the strange strength hidden inside all this. California's risk environment has also produced a culture of adaptation. Home hardening, local fire prep networks, community alerts, policy activism, and people who are weirdly informed about things most Americans never have to think about. It's exhausting, yes, but it also creates a population that understands, maybe better than most, that prosperity without resilience is just a nice-looking plan. If you're still with me, drop a comment. Do you think California's biggest long-term threat is housing costs, insurance instability, or political gridlock? And if you're enjoying this, subscribe, because next we're going into another huge piece of the California psyche: migration and reinvention, why so many people leave, so many people arrive, and why California still functions like a dream factory even when half the internet says it's collapsing. 8. Migration and reinvention. Why people leave California, then California rebuilds itself. Anyway, imagine you're at a California airport gate. One person is moving to Texas because they want a yard and lower taxes. Another is moving to Nevada because rent finally broke the math. Another just landed from another country with 2 suitcases and a plan. Another says they're only here for a year, and then accidentally stays for 12. That is California's migration psychology in one terminal. People are always leaving. People are always arriving. And the state keeps reinventing itself through that churn. This is why California is so hard to describe with one narrative. If you only look at outmigration, you'll think it's decline. If you only look at economic output and global talent inflows, you'll think it's unstoppable. The truth is more interesting. California is a high-turnover dream market. It loses people, gains people, and keeps reshaping who gets to participate in the next version of the state. Let's start with the part people love to argue about online, the exodus. PPICs. January 2026 migration analysis says that from 2010 through 2024, almost 10 million people moved from California to other states, while just over 7 million moved into California from other states, using ACS data. It also notes California has lost residents to other states every year since 2001, per Department of Finance estimates. That's not a social media myth. That's a long-running demographic pattern. And PPIC's companion blog from January 2026 adds an important nuance. Outmigration has settled into a relatively stable pattern that tends to favour nearby states and states without income taxes. But Californians are also becoming more selective about destination housing costs. So it's not just escape California, it's escape California carefully and don't recreate the same bill in a cheaper zip code. That distinction matters psychologically. Because California doesn't just produce migration, it produces strategic migration. People don't leave because they hate sunshine. They leave because they're doing life math. Housing cost, commute time, taxes, childcare, insurance, job flexibility, whether they can still build wealth before 50. This is why migration from California often feels less like giving up and more like a tactical retreat. But now here's the part people miss. Even while California loses residents to other states, it still gains population through other channels, especially international migration. PPIC's California Population Fact Sheet, January 2026, says the state has 39.5 million people, July 2025 estimates, remains the largest state, and notes that net international migration increased sharply after the pandemic-era collapse, from near zero in 2020 to 2021 to 718,000 between July 2022 and July 2025, even as domestic. Losses remained large, about 1.3 million net losses to other states over that same April 2020 to July 2025 period. That is the California reset mechanism. The state bleeds people to cheaper places while still attracting new residents, especially from abroad, because the opportunity structure remains globally attractive, and that's not a small side note, it's central to California's psychology. PPIC's January 2026 Immigrants in California fact sheet says, California is home to 10.9 million immigrants, 28% of the population was foreign-born in 2024, highest share of any state, and 44% of California children have at least one immigrant parent. Read that again. Almost half of California's children have an immigrant parent. That means California's future is being shaped in households where risk, sacrifice, language switching, and economic adaptation are often normal life skills. That has huge psychological consequences for the state. Higher tolerance for reinvention, stronger survival mentality, broader definitions of ambition, more family-centered economic decision-making, and a deeper cultural memory of starting over. California doesn't just attract dreamers, it attracts people who are willing to rebuild from scratch. And that creates a very different emotional ecosystem from a state where most people stay near where they were born. There is a serious case here. California's high costs, housing shortages, and visible inequality do push residents out. PPIC explicitly ties a lot of outmigration behavior to affordability, and we already saw earlier how housing costs dominate the state's economic psychology. If enough middle-class households leave, the state risks becoming even more polarized between very high earners and financially strained households. That concern is real. But the counterpoint is just as strong. California's churn is also one reason it remains culturally and economically dynamic. The same Census Quick Facts page that shows the housing pressure also shows the state's diversity and productive scale. 27.0% foreign-born, 2020 to 2024 estimate set. 44.4% speaking a language other than English at home. 37.1% with a bachelor's degree or higher. 16.4 million total employment, 2023. and over 1 million employer establishments. That combination, diversity plus talent plus business density, is a reinvention engine. So California ends up with a strange but powerful pattern. It loses people who are priced out. It gains people willing to take risk. It keeps producing opportunity and stress at the same time. That's why the state can feel in decline and still the future, depending on which block you're standing on. And this churn changes identity too. In a lot of places, identity is inherited. My family's from here. My grandparents worked here. This is just how we do things. In California, identity is often assembled. I came here for school. I stayed for work. I moved for my partner. I switched industries. I left and came back. I'm here because this is where the next version of me might work. That's a very California sentence. The next version of me. It's also why California can be emotionally unstable but culturally magnetic. People don't come here for calm. They come here for possibility. Even the official population story reflects that tension. PPIC notes, California's growth has slowed dramatically over the long run, but it still projects population growth ahead via Department of Finance projections, just at a slower pace than the old boom years. In other words, California isn't dead. It's maturing and fighting with itself while doing it. That's the deeper psychological point. California is no longer the simple post-war just move here and prosper machine. Now it's a competitive sorting system. It rewards skill, timing, networks, resilience, and sometimes pure luck. It punishes inefficiency, weak margins, and denial. It attracts people who can improvise under pressure. It repels people who need stability before upside. And yes, that sounds harsh. But it also explains why California keeps producing disproportionate culture, technology, and reinvention even while people complain about it non-stop. Because the churn is the system. The exits are real, the arrivals are real, the dream is real, the bill is also real, and California somehow keeps running on all four. If this part hit home, let me know in the comments. Do you think California's churn makes it stronger, or makes it impossible to build a stable middle class? And if you're still watching, subscribe, because next we're going to bring it all together with the final section. What California teaches the rest of the world about ambition, inequality, risk, and what happens when a place becomes both a dream and a stress test at the same time. 9. What California teaches the world. The dream, the stress test, and the future. So now step back. What have we really been describing? Not just a state, a model. California is what happens when you combine extreme opportunity, extreme cost, extreme visibility, extreme inequality, and a population that keeps arriving anyway. It is a place where the future often shows up early and sends the invoice immediately. That's why California feels so psychologically intense. It's not just expensive, it's compressed. Trends that unfold over decades in other places get accelerated in California. Housing pressure, identity performance, platform-driven status anxiety, climate risk, institutional distrust, migration sorting, reinvention as a life skill. California is basically modern life on fast forward, and that's why people outside California are often weirdly obsessed with it. Some people use California as a warning. See, this is what happens when things get too expensive, too political, too unequal. Others use it as a blueprint. See, this is where the future gets built first. Both are partly right, and that's the point. California is not a clean story. It's a contradiction engine. It produces world-changing companies and everyday burnout. It generates cultural trends and housing insecurity. It attracts global talent and pushes out long-time residents. It creates immense wealth and visible fragility. It frustrates people constantly and still keeps their attention. That combination creates a very specific psychological profile in Californians, the core California mindset. By now, you can probably see the pattern. A lot of Californians become 1. Highly adaptive. They learn to pivot, improvise, and rebuild fast because the environment demands it. 2. Financially alert. Even high earners often think defensively because costs, risks, and volatility stay high. 3. Identity conscious. In a high visibility state, people learn to manage how they present themselves, socially, professionally, digitally. 4. Institutionally skeptical. They rely on systems they often distrust, so they become transactional. Show me results. 5. Ambitious but tired. This might be the most California trait of all. They still believe in possibility, they're just exhausted from what possibility costs. And honestly, that may be the most modern psychological condition there is. Because California is not only teaching us about California, it's teaching us what happens when an economy becomes more winner-take-most, more visual, more platform-mediated, more expensive to enter, and more unstable at the basic life level. In that sense, California is not an outlier anymore. It's a preview. A lot of other states and countries are now dealing with their own versions of the same pressure. Housing affordability collapse, youth anxiety and identity, comparison, distrust of institutions, climate-linked risk, migration and social sorting, good jobs that still don't feel like enough. California just got there first, and louder. Now let's be fair, because this whole video has been about nuance. The strongest pro-California argument is still powerful. California remains one of the most economically productive, innovative, and culturally influential places on Earth. It has extraordinary universities, major industries, global talent pipelines, and a deep culture of experimentation and reinvention. For many people, it still offers opportunities they simply cannot access elsewhere. That's true. But the strongest critique is also true. If the cost of participation keeps rising faster than people's sense of stability, then California risks becoming a place where only the very rich and the very desperate can fully stay in the game. And if that happens, the state doesn't just get more expensive, it gets psychologically harsher. So the real question for California is not, is it winning or failing? That's internet comment thinking. The real question is, can California preserve the upside while lowering the psychological tax? Can it remain a dream factory without being a burnout factory? Can it reward ambition without punishing ordinary life? Can it stay innovative while rebuilding trust? Can it make room for reinvention and stability? That's the test. And honestly, that's not just California's test. That's the test for a lot of modern societies now. 10. Final takeaway. If you've watched this whole video, here's the simplest way to understand the psychology of California. California is a place where hope and stress live in the same house. That's why it inspires people. That's why it exhausts people. That's why people leave. That's why people come back. That's why the rest of the world keeps watching. Because California is not just a state, it's what ambition feels like when the stakes are high. If you enjoyed this breakdown, subscribe and check out the rest of the series, especially if you want more psychology plus economics deep dives on other states, countries, or systems. And drop your next video idea in the comments. Which place should we analyze next? Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.